بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the opportunity to continue on the path of purification. Tazkiyatun nafs, with the meaning of purification, not considering oneself to be pure. Inshallah, we'll come to that because one of the condemned characteristics is, according to the Quran, is tazkiyatun nafs. But there are two meanings to the term. One is to try to purify, to reach purification. One, to assume purification. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَا تُزَكُّوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. Don't do tazkiyah in the sense of don't consider yourself to be pure. Don't assume that you are pure. So there are two meanings for the expression. One is to try and purify, tazkiyatun nafs, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. And one is to assume that it's pure, فَلَا تُزَكُّوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. That's not what we should be doing. We don't assume that it's pure, rather we should purify. Same expression, but based on the context, the meaning is derived. We were in the section where, again, we were reflecting on the book Jami al-Sa'adat from Naraqi. Al-Allama Naraqi, he has this book in Akhlaq, or Islamic ethics and purification, and it's a very practical book. As I mentioned to Mu'minin and Mu'minat, the original book is written in a very much not just a book of facts, but more of a book of emotions, more like a word of advice. So he's like speaking to the audience. He's communicating, almost like a dialogue. And therefore, there are a lot of reminders, examples that he gives, and he speaks to the reader as if he is addressing someone, as someone who's written a letter, for example. So he says, for instance, فَأَنْتَ, you as a traveler, you should be doing so and so. And so he addresses very directly. Again, the English one does not seem to have this aspect to it. It's very brief and more of a summary. In any case, perhaps maybe using modern technology, we can translate the full book. It also obviously needs verification and editing, but that would make, it's a lot easier nowadays. The section we were up to is where he states that the balance of all the powers, all of the faculties and powers of the nafs. So nafs, we said, has the faculty of intellect, aql, and the faculty of the ghadab, which is that ability to be angry and to be strong in emotions. So it's not necessarily just anger, but to have those strong emotions, that ability that could be used for positive things. And one could be brave as a result, or could be used negatively, and one could be harsh or unforgiving, full of rage, and so on. So that faculty, the other faculty, the desire, the imagination, all of those faculties, the balance of them is one path, and that is adl, or adala, justice. To reach a state of qist, we said qist is also like a scale, to equity. Equity and justice used interchangeably, because it's a state of keeping the balance. That's why the justice departments, normally they have this logo, they have a scale. So it's a balance. And whenever we go off balance, either way, ifrat or tafrit, either extreme. In Arabic, extremism in the extra or less are two different terms. So ifrat when it's extra, tafrit is when it's less. When you do less than what you should do, it's tafrit. When you do more, it's ifrat. In either direction, if we go off the balance, it's considered injustice or all sorts of the vices. So he says the virtue is the middle path, almost like the Sirat al-Mustaqim. And when we go off that is when we have so many levels of being away from the center or the right path, the best path. He says, he gives an example in part of the dialogue. In this section, he gives an example of the physical equilibrium of the physical body. So he says the physical body has a healthy state, okay, the healthiest, okay. So for instance, in terms of how much fat you should have on your body, okay. Doctors, they give you an ideal figure. And there's definitely, not, they may be right or wrong or a little off, but there's definitely an ideal level, obviously for given times as well. As you're younger, the ideal level could be different to an older person, okay? If one works in the field, it could be different to one who does not, who works in an office, for example. So ideals for every individual and in every given time could be different. He says similarly, when it comes to the ruh, the equilibrium is one, the perfect state, and going off that equilibrium could be either way, more or less, ifrat and tafrit, either extreme, and also time and place and individuals, their equilibrium would be different. So when we say Sirat al-Mustaqim, it is not the same for everybody. And perhaps the meaning of paths towards God are the number of breaths of mankind. الطرق إلى الله عدد أنفاس الخلائق. Perhaps this is what it is referring to. That, I mean, there are so many ways of seeing it, but this is one of the ways of seeing it, that for everybody, their Sirat al-Mustaqim is different. Based on what? Based on aql, based on their abilities, the level of shaja'ah they were given in the first place, okay, bravery or ghadab that they were given, the level of shahwa they were given, okay. Some people have more desire than others. So for some people, controlling certain desires, for example, in terms of their interaction with other genders and having relationships and so on, for some people it's less, and it's a known fact, okay. Science confirms it, psychology confirms it, and our ulama, religious scholars also confirm that different people have different levels of desire. Different people have different levels of anger. Some people don't have much anger in them. It's not part of them. Some people are born with more of that. And so their challenge is different. To say their way and their equilibrium is exactly the same as the other person is injustice. And which environment you were born in, which time, which place. Okay, one is born in Najaf, another is born in Qom, another is born in Las Vegas. I went to the airport in Las Vegas, and I haven't been to Las Vegas as in the city, but I went to the airport. I was just doing what do they call it, layover or something? And it was amazing. In the airport, it was full of the gambling machines, whatever you call them. I don't know, these poker machines or something. Huh? Slot machine. Yeah, slot. Slot? Slot machines. Okay. Yeah. So it was all over. And you don't need to go outside the airport to start. So for those who would want to do that, and we seek refuge to God and hope and pray that humanity can rid themselves from this disease. It's a disease. Gambling is another disease, which is also, I mean, as we are studying this, it has to do with certain faculties, wanting more. One thing is, that desire, and also some of the vices, as we will be starting to study them, some of the vices have to do with multiple faculties. One of them is this, desiring more, and also having wrong type of bravery. Okay, so the bravery is the middle path as the virtue, and being hasty, or thinking one is brave, making such decisions to waste their wealth in hope that they would get more, and so on. So also lack of use of or the wrong usage of their faculty of intellect. So multiple mistakes on multiple faculties for this disease to exist. In any case, so we said that just like we have the physical or medical equilibrium of the body, for instance, doctors tell you you have, for your blood sugar at your age, the ideal, and they should, I mean, doctors should consider also race, the place of or ethnicity, because these things vary, and they have uncovered some of those things, even in terms of how much water you should drink, for example. So just like there is an equilibrium for the physical body, and from a medical perspective, there is that equilibrium for the spiritual, the existence, or the real existence of insan, the real insan. And also it's important to recognize that everyone, just like we mentioned, if you're born from a different lineage, your blood sugar, the best level of blood sugar or other factors would be different to someone who's born in a different family, from a different ethnicity or lineage. Just a point about that, and we said the important thing is to stay on that middle, okay? And it's to stay there, it requires a lot of steadfastness, and that's why the Quran says, فَاسْتَقِمْ كَمَا أُمِرْتَ. And that is why the Prophet ﷺ, he says, شَيَّبَتْنِي سُورَةُ Hud, because of this ayah. فَاسْتَقِمْ كَمَا أُمِرْتَ, to stay steadfast as you have been commanded. The next section is about the mention of the names of vices and their types. So he says, for every virtue, there are levels of vices. Okay, for every virtue as the equilibrium, there are levels, extremes. And so if you go more in that faculty, you have certain extreme, which is a vice. And if you go less, you have another extreme, which is another vice. And also there are levels within those. Some of those vices are related to one of the faculties. Some of them are related to two faculties. Some of them are related to three faculties. And for every one of those vices, there is an opposite, which is a virtue related to the equilibrium, stemming from the middle path. So the middle path is justice. Going away from it are all the vices. And for every vice, there is a title, a name given for its opposite, which is the virtue related to it. And it is back to the middle. Okay, it's not like it's going to the other extreme. No, we're still talking about the middle. So for every virtue, there would be two levels of vices, and for every one of those vices, there is the opposite, which is also a virtue. Worked. This is Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. This is not reciting time. Inshallah, reciting time, it'll be your time. Inshallah. She wants to recite the majlis already. So now he in this section he introduces the order that he's going with. So he will mention the vices and their types, their level, different degrees and types, and their opposites, as in the virtue that's the opposite of that vice. And he will just mention them initially, and then eventually he says he would be giving the remedy, how to purify from those vices, inshallah. Starting, we have the power of intellect. Okay? For the power of intellect, if we go to one extreme, overthinking, thinking without using the proper the proper methodology of thinking, the proper reasoning or teachings of the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt, which would put us, on basically on a path where we are learning the truth rather than getting into ambiguities and doubts. So if we overthink without that methodology, then he says one would fall in what he calls safsata. Safsata, perhaps the term sophisticated comes from that, okay? But it is to say, the safsata is when one makes up something that looks like knowledge and wisdom, but it's made up on basis of doubts and assumptions, and therefore it's not truth. Okay, philosophizing, just making up stuff. It's not really the truth. That is one extreme. Another extreme is to be in a state of ignorance and not even use intellect. So both of them are ignorance on two different extremes. One used his intellect or her intellect, but did not use the proper methodology and the guidelines given by the Prophet, by the Quran, by God and Ahlul Bayt, given by scholars who have spent years researching and developing those methodologies and guidelines. Without using those, one just makes up, they think they use the power of intellect, but they are not using it properly and with the right methodology. Therefore, they make up assumptions and call it knowledge. Okay? That is one extreme. Another extreme is to not use intellect, not to think, and remain in a state of ignorance. For the shaja'a, for the faculty of ghadab, we said the balance is shaja'a, where one is brave. One off balance is tahawwur, and tahawwur is a state of basically ignorantly jumping into risky and dangerous things. The best term in the English, they used a term that I was not very satisfied with, but the best term, صلوا على محمد وعلى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. that I came up with recklessness. Or impulsiveness. Okay, so for one to recklessly jump into something impulsively without thinking, without considering the consequences, and without a good cause. Okay, sometimes you do something knowing that there's a risk, a great risk to your life, for example, or to your property, but you're doing something really great. It justifies it. You've thought it through, and you've. But another one is to be reckless and not consider the consequences. That's one level. The other level is cowardness. Okay, for one to be coward and not to even consider doing anything. Okay, and so they also have levels. He says one of the levels, for example, is when you go into one extreme, you would, or back to the balance. The balance is when one considers what they're doing, uses that rage, that feeling of that strong emotion that's in them, uses it positively and goes ahead and does something that's considered brave. However, on the opposite of that is for one to just jump into dangerous situations without any consideration, without any major goal in mind, that I'm trying to achieve something big that would justify the risk that I'm taking, for example. So caution is good, but not to lead to being coward and not doing anything. And that's one extreme of it. And the other extreme is where one does not have any caution, doesn't even consider the circumstances and the risks and so on. Another one is regarding and these are the basics, okay? And then he'll come to the different levels. When it comes to the level of desire, or the faculty of desire, the balance we said is iffa. And iffa was what? Limiting desire to what is permissible, only considering what is permissible, ta'affuf. And then the other one is to excessively indulge into the desires. And the other extreme is to even to stay away from, they call it khumud. So either sharah is excessively indulgence in desires, and khumud is when one doesn't even go for what is permissible, okay, which is also not right, it's a vice. One is extra, one is less. And again, he emphasizes that the balance, justice, is one. And there's a clarification here, very important clarification. So if justice is one, we said for every virtue, which is the balance, there is excessive from one direction, or excessiveness or less from the other direction. So either extreme. One is you do more, one is less. And each of those have levels of vices. What about justice? Justice being the balance. If we do more or less, both of them, he says, they're both dhulm. Alaykum salam. You see the issue. So either way is dhulm. So back to some of the examples. When we said for intellect, if you think without using overthinking, without using the proper methodology and teachings and guidelines, therefore limitations. That is one level of dhulm. What if we don't think, we don't use our intellect, and we stay in jahl? That's another level of dhulm. So both of those are dhulm, as opposed to adl, which is to use our intellect right. At-tafakkur, that is correct. Shaja'a, we said for the ghadab, for the faculty of ghadab, the anger, the virtue is shaja'a, bravery. One extreme is tahawwur, recklessness. Another extreme is cowardness or cowardly. Either of those are extremes. The shaja'a is adl. Justice is the middle, bravery. What about the other two? They're both dhulm. So therefore he says for dhulm, for adl, there's one opposite, which is dhulm. Either way is dhulm. Okay? Whether we do more, we're doing dhulm. If we do less, we're doing dhulm. Either way.
Questions?
Yeah.
So in the example of someone who indulges too much in their shahwa versus, what is that term?
Khumud, they call it. Yeah. So shara is the term he uses for excessive indulgence in desire, and khumud he uses for not.
So if you have to evaluate those two, isn't one who's excessively indulging in a worse off situation, even though both are dhulm? Wouldn't you say the one who is in the category of khumud is not as worse because they have trained themselves to restrain themselves, even though it might be detrimental because you're not following the middle path? How can both be categorized in the same bucket? Both are dhulm, but wouldn't one objectively see that this one is clearly indulging excessively and is not taking care of himself and is just, reckless? The other one, he's withholding himself more than what he should, but at least he's not.
Yeah. So I fully understand. Now they're both considered dhulm. Okay. Now yes, dhulm is degrees. Okay. Can we compare this one to that one? It depends. Okay. It depends because of the abilities and capabilities and the level of desire in each one of those people. Maybe the one who's going down the path of khumud, he or she does not have much desires, okay, and therefore they prefer not to even do what's halal. Okay, you tell them get married and increase in numbers, they don't have the desire. The one that has the desire, they should control and just stick to marrying and not committing zina, adultery and so on. That's stick to what's halal. Yeah. What about the one that doesn't have so much desire? I would rather not do the marriage thing because it's too much headache. You see what I mean? So that's dhulm as well. Because that's
clearly worse, right?
Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to continue existing. So that's dhulm. Okay? Why are you depriving the human society of continuation? That's dhulm. Okay? Each one of us should be continuing to basically bring the future generation. So if we were to kill that desire, we're affecting. So that is dhulm in a sense. Okay. Now populations, they try to increase. Why? Some. Yeah. In some countries, they pay money if you have children. Okay. If you have a new child, when I was in Australia, they paid a good lump sum. Okay. So if I remember back then, based on the number, they said if that optimum, the mother of the eight, it happened then. They were saying if it happened in Australia, she would have become, rich, based on the initial lump sum payment, a down payment on a house, and then continuous, government support and so on. Why? Because they need population. Why do they pay that money? Because their people have khumud. Okay, it is a desire to have children. That's a desire.
Or they have the desire to mingle, but they just don't want to.
Yeah, don't want to have children. That's a desire in itself. Okay, and they killed it. Okay, by nature we want to have children, but they preferred just going after other ways of fulfilling their desires or needs, and not take the responsibility of having children, for example, or other ways of having khumud, for instance. So either way, it's dhulm. Now, who knows how much desire is in that person who is failing to control themselves and committing sins in that department? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. So I cannot say that this person is worse than this person. The balance is the balance. Okay, we cannot do qiyas and say this person is worse. Okay, God knows. Maybe God has put so much desire in this person, and that's his trial. Okay, he fails here and there, but he's still trying, regretful. God knows, and he will return or not return, and so on. And on the other hand, the other one doesn't have. There's no desire, so much desire not to indulge. So what is your problem? Why aren't you doing what God and his messenger have said? Okay, tanakahu tazawadu. He says you do this and you need to increase in numbers. Why aren't you doing it? Take away. So if we were to compare, I'll give you an example. This is interesting, very interesting, I think, way of assessing. Tariqus salat, somebody who abandons salat, and one who commits adultery, az-zani. The imam, he says tariqus salat is worse. You may think, well, that's zina. Okay, why? He says because, and this is the point I was making, he says tariqus salat, there is no desire to not pray. The one who committed zina, if you take the shahwa out of him, he wouldn't do zina. Okay, but what do you want to take out of someone who abandons salat? There's no shahwa not to pray. That one failed because of his shahwa. That one is failing because of his own decision. Yeah. So that could be a similar situation. Okay. One is failing because of an extreme desire that's in them, whereas the other one is failing to follow guidelines of the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt and the Quran, failing because of the decision they made. Has nothing to do with any desire in terms of like they have a desire not to. There's no desire not to. So, but anyway, yes, they're both dhulm. Ahsant, and also salat tanha an al-fahsha'i wal munkar. So one who prays properly would probably not get into any of those great sins. So here is a section where he says all of these vices, they have types, levels, and opposites, and they also have things that are attached to them, things that come with them. Okay, so some vices are attached to other vices that come along with them. So he says we will go over those and over their what is attached to them, the vices, what's attached to them, their opposites, as in the virtue that's opposite to them, and also eventually coming to the way or the remedies, how we can remedy those vices or purify from them. When it comes to aql, he says one extreme already we mentioned, safsata. Okay, and we said safsata is what? Is a state of thinking without using the right guidelines of how we should think and assess. Overthinking when we're told not to think. I'll give you an example. We're told not to think about the essence of God. That's something we should not be thinking about. So if somebody starts not just thinking, making assumptions, and even some may start speaking about it, okay, with those assumptions that they made. It sounds like they have some knowledge, okay, and they start giving you assumptions and so on without knowledge. Quran says, وَلَا تَقْفُ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٌ. Don't make a statement or stand on something that you don't have knowledge of. So there are some who they start making all sorts of statements and assumptions, and that's safsata. When it's not based on ilm, that thinking, that those analysis, those writings, all of that is considered safsata, and it's not based on, as we said, the guidelines, and therefore it is one level of jahl, but often they refer to it as al-jahl al-murakkab. It is, I would say, sophisticated ignorance. Okay, it sounds like they know something, but it's actually ignorance. It's nothing but ignorance. There was recently we were debating about some guy who puts up some nice terms and nice terminology, real knowledge-based terms, and he puts them together in a presentation and leads to a conclusion that differs with the Quran and the Hadith and Ahlul Bayt and our scholars, and yet he considers that to be ilm. That is safsata. It may impress people who have less knowledge, but with knowledge, people will realize that these people have no real knowledge. They are nothing but they're not in yattabi'una illa dhann. Quran says they're only following assumptions. The translation for the term I found was sophistry. However, it's not necessarily what is the term is used as the expression in ilm al-akhlaq for safsata is not the term itself, because safsata, sophistry, could be lining up reasons in order to reach a conclusion. However, what they mean in ilm al-akhlaq is lining up assumptions. Some knowledge, some assumptions, mix them up together, line them up, and give a conclusion that's not based on real knowledge. That is the safsata. That is the one extreme. He says this is from the extreme of excessive thinking. The other one is al-jahl al-basit, the simple ignorance. So one is al-jahl al-murakkab, which is the sophisticated ignorance based. It is ignorance, but it's so sophisticated that some may seem like knowledge. Okay, it's a statement. The other one is very easily identified as ignorance. It's jahl al-basit, and this is for less thinking. The opposite of both is wisdom, knowledge and wisdom, ilm and hikmah. That's the center. Yeah, the center is ilm and hikmah, and of this balance, we said the sirat al-mustaqim, one extreme is a vice, the other extreme vice, and there are levels in these vices. So there is one, he says the example is when you do more, it's safsata, when you do less, it's jahl, the simple ignorance versus sophisticated ignorance. And the balance is ilm and hikmah. And so with them, it comes certain things. He mentions al-jahl al-murakkab, which is again what some may translate as compound ignorance or sophisticated, it's basically piled up. Okay, compound ignorance, is that what they wrote there? As opposed to simple? Okay, excellent. So one is perhaps compound ignorance, and the opposite of that we said al-basit. Yeah, the other extreme is al-basit, simple. The one of them is, so one of the things with the faculties is if we don't use it properly. Okay, so sometimes we use too much, sometimes we use too little, sometimes we use wrongly. So here he says one of the reasons for this kind of ignorance is wrong usage. Okay, so you are using it, but you're using it wrong. Okay, rada'atul kayfiyya. The quality here is not the good quality of thinking. Another one is to have doubt. Al-hiratu wa-shak, to be in a state of doubt. Doubt is, now, as a path towards yaqeen, that is okay, and we'll come to that. You doubt something because you're thinking, you have doubts, and therefore you start identifying the areas where you have doubt, you start researching them and trying to get to certainty, yaqeen. That's okay. But doubt as a platform. Okay, some people live in doubt. That's their platform. That's where they live. In fact, even when they speak, they're always casting doubts. There's a speaker, a pseudo scholar, who has this habit of always casting doubt. Sometimes people share some short videos, and I wonder and ask, so what is the conclusion? He questioned this, he questioned that. Okay, so what is where are we now? Where are we gonna settle? What is the base? Where are we going to find a place to stand on? None. Okay, and that is very wrong attitude. So al-hiratu wa-shak is they are vices as a station, as compared to the balance of al-aql, al-ilm, al-hikmah, here al-yaqeen. All of those are in the balance. The opposite of it is obviously to have knowledge, and the opposite of doubt is to have the yaqeen. So yaqeen is actually the opposite of both extremes. Jahl al-murakkab, the compound or the sophisticated ignorance, one thinks they have knowledge, but it's wrong. It's wrong knowledge, wrong information rather, wrong conclusion. The other one stays in doubt, knows that they don't know. The middle path for both of those is to have certainty, yaqeen.
So the waswas doesn't come into this category?
Yes, that waswas is another one of those. It's also one of the vices in the category of aql. It's coming actually. So it's similar. Okay, waswasa and this state of doubt, and it's very similar to in fact to doubt. It's one of the results rather. Okay, so sometimes being in one of those, allowing some of those vices to exist within us lead to waswas. Okay, lead to other vices. In this case, allowing doubt leads to waswas. Even when it comes to psychology, and waswas is very, spirituality and psychology are related somehow, because it's our thoughts and how we think, and sometimes some of our assumptions or state of mind that leads to certain problems, certain psychological diseases that are recognized as diseases. Obsessive compulsive or waswas is recognized as a disease, as a problem, okay? And it's a result of a state of doubt, not having any kind of platform to stand on. And so one staying in there become in our Islamic studies or in our scriptures and ahadith, we have so many references to the fact that one who's in doubt becomes the target of who? Shaitan. And that is why it's called waswas. That disease is called waswas because it has to do with the whispering, yuwaswisu fi sudur nas. So it actually is, it becomes that doubt becomes the gate to shaitan. And he comes to that, inshallah. We'll see it right here actually. He says the reason of doubt is because of the weak intellect. Okay, if one has weak intellect, and also sometimes has to do with the other faculty. In the other faculty, al-ghadabiyya, one would not want to be submissive. Okay, in the faculty of ghadabiyya, anger, submission is not, taslim is not a good thing for one who's enraged, one who feels better, one who has that, one who controls it is willing and able to submit where they should submit. That's the balance. Submit where you should submit, not where you should not. To an oppressor, you don't submit. But to God and His Messenger, you should submit. So between the bad quality of thinking and therefore being in doubt and the not willing to submit because allowing the ghadab, overpowering to exist and to take over, between those two, one becomes the prey of shaitan. I'm not willing to submit. I don't understand properly. لا لأمره تعقلون ولا لأوليائه تسمعون. The Imam of the time has, in one of his statements, I believe a letter to Shaykh al-Mufid, he has this statement, if I'm not mistaken. But in one of his tawqi'at, one of the signed documents or the letters that he has, he says, لا لأمره تعقلون ولا لأوليائه تسمعون. You don't understand God's command or his matter, and you don't listen to his guardians, the awliya, the ones who are sent or appointed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a problem. We don't understand it, kudurat al-dhihn, weakness of the or some layers of perhaps God forbid sinfulness and so on. We cannot understand and we're not willing to submit. What happens? Shaitan comes and it becomes a state of waswas. He says one of the virtues, again back to the vices, for the level, for the faculty of aql. All of these are vices for the faculty of aql. One of them is, again, just to clarify, we were saying that the reason why one would be in doubt is weakness of the mind, the faculty of intellect, and or sometimes there might exist the asabiyya, which has to do with what? The faculty of ghadab, wanting to defend oneself. I cannot be wrong. Okay, not wanting to submit, and also blind following, taqleed. Okay, blind following. We follow blindly, and those lead to, again, shak and eventually shirk, even the opposite of which is tawheed, to recognize the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says one of those vices is, like you mentioned, al-wasawis, different whispering that happen within the nafs. And typically they are called the devilish ideas, khawatir shaytaniya, devilish ideas that comes to the mind. Sometimes one, we have, for instance, a good virtue, which is husnul dhan, to give people the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes, in extreme cases, to have some su'al dhan is okay. Some of su'al dhan is haram. Yes? Inna ba'da dhanni ithm. Not all of it. In some cases, somebody, there are a lot of scams that are happening, and somebody comes and offers you something. To doubt their intention is not necessarily a sin. Yeah, maybe he's scamming me. Let's make sure he's not scamming me. That doubt is not a sin. But for one to get to a level where they start doubting everybody, okay, parents, they want evil for me, they never loved me. There are people who alhamdulillah, normal humans, regardless of religious or non-religious, they recognize someone in this state as someone who's sick, someone who's not mentally well. Yeah. And when we say not mentally well or psychologically ill, it's similarly spiritually ill. This is the almost identical state. Okay. Same diseases. We consider it as a disease for one to be in a state of wasawis, doubting absolutely everybody. Okay, no one wants goodness for me. I don't trust anyone, not even the spouse, not children, not parents. Everyone wants the evil for me, and so on. These are vices again, extremes, al-wasawis. And again, this is a result, and sometimes, subhanAllah, when you speak to some of these people, they'll justify it all. They'll explain to you how they have come to this conclusion, and they'll start telling you all the stories. On one platform, I receive questions, and some of those people, you can sense it from the beginning. When you start reading what they're saying, you sense it from the beginning that this person has this waswas issue. Okay, the whole thing is filled, and subhanAllah, the same people, if they ask you religious questions, it's the same. If they ask you social questions, it's the same. If they ask you, I don't know, marital, whatever question, it's the same. You sense that waswas, extreme doubt, doubting everyone, everything. And that's they consider that the bad quality of thinking. So thinking is good. Now these people are thinking, using their thinking, analyzing, and using their intellect, their mind, but not in a positive way, in a very bad quality. That's in a very negative way, and therefore they're coming to conclusions that the world is evil, everything's evil, everyone's evil. Okay. Alhamdulillah, they attribute everything, like almost saying that shaitan is in power in this world. Alhamdulillah, they recognize shaitan, because otherwise they would suggest that, even God, wal-'iyadhu billah. So that is considered one of the vices, obviously, and this is the result of overthinking, okay, in a negative way, without the guidelines, without the teachings of the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt, and also allowing the faculty of ghadab to control. And so it has a factor, it plays a factor in there. One of the vices, again, in this area is coming up with plots and plans to fulfill one's desires. Okay, makr, al-hila, to be deceptive and come up with plots, not for a good reason, obviously, but to fulfill one's desires, or fulfill the faculty of anger and rage. That's also one of the vices. And that is also overusage. So the faculty of aql, the mind is being used, but used in a wrong way. Okay? If one doesn't use it, in this case, may be better for them. Because what they're using it for is to reach a certain plan to harm somebody, to fulfill their desires. Okay? You have some sick people, I don't know, serial killers or whatever other people. When you read their stories and profile, you'll find that they used, I mean, they used a lot of thinking. They had to plan and have all the plan B and C and all the different ways of reaching what they want, but what they want is unfortunately evil. So that's all, these are all vices. وَمِنْهَا اسْتِنْبَاطُ الْمَكْرِ وَالْحِيلَةِ, he says, and that's when one is wanting to fulfill their desires. When it comes to, so this is all about aql. This is just a brief, basically, statement to just state or list those vices. He hasn't gone into the remedies or more details about them. So we'll keep it simple for now, so we can go over the rest of them, and inshallah we'll follow with the book to come to the remedies, the more details about those vices and their opposites, and also the remedies for them. The next one, he says, regarding the faculty of ghadab. We translated it as anger, but I keep going to ghadab because, as I mentioned, it's not necessarily just anger. It's that powerful emotion that could be used positively or negatively. If it's used positively, it could be bravery and standing up against injustice, bravely and so on. And obviously negatively will come to some of those vices. So one of them, he says, when it comes, we briefly mentioned earlier that the middle is called bravery. The one extreme is recklessness. The other extreme is to be coward. Or now some other levels. One of them, he says, fear. Fear is part of the cowardness, yes? Except, he has an exception, except if one is fearful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, knowing how, understanding the majesty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts one in a state of fear or awe, that, I have to be wary. God could seize me immediately. So that state is okay in this only with respect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, fearing sins, essentially fearing sins and the consequences of sins. Imam Ali alayhi salam, he says in one of his beautiful statements, he says, let none of you fear anyone except their own sins. وَلَا يَخَافَنَّ أَحَدٌ مِّنْكُمْ إِلَّا ذَنْبَهُ. In other words, here the fear of God is translated into fearing the consequences of the sins that are set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. God has set in this universe, has set rules. And for every action, there's a reaction. There are consequences for our actions. And so fearing God translates into fearing the consequences of our actions, the sins. Sins have very bad consequences here and in the hereafter. Some of them you can see clearly here. Some of them we don't see it here immediately, but it is here as well. And it reflects itself in the hereafter, the eternal regret and so on. So khawf, he says, is one of the vices unless it is regarding sins and considering our duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Otherwise, it's one of the results of being coward. And the opposite of that is feeling a state of safety and security. Feeling secure because we are in the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? We are in the protection of God. There should be no fear. Okay? The believers, أُولَٰئِكَ لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. They have no fear. They only fear sins and the state with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be disobedient. Otherwise, there's no fear of what could happen. If I say the right thing, this person could stand against me and say something. Doesn't matter. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there. He will defend me. Allahu inna Allah yudafi'u an alladhina amanu. Surely God defends those who believe. So again, khawf is one of those vices, and feeling secure and safe with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a state of tranquility, is the opposite of that. Another one, yes.
So Prophet Musa, when he was pushing him, he was told to put the stick down. He said that Allah told him,
أوجس في نفسه خيفة إنه لا يخاف لدي المرسلين.
So
Yeah.
isn't this a type of fear that the prophets should not be scared?
Okay, so fear as in recklessness? No. We're speaking of the bravery as the middle path, and then recklessness is one extreme, and then the other extreme is the being coward. Okay, so to be, we mentioned last week, I think it was last week, that sometimes bravery necessitates running away from danger. Okay, so it's they have a saying that running away is part of manlyhood and bravery. Okay, you don't stay in danger knowing that it's dangerous and there's no need for you to stay in that danger. There's no defense of anybody. There's no, so that is the state of recklessness. Okay, another one is fear. The middle path is bravery. For Musa alayhi salam, a natural thing when a serpent or a snake runs after you or runs around you is to what?
Stop.
We have to be, stop. We don't allow it to come, and so that fear is justified. Okay, what the lesson he was being taught then, and this is part of ilm, okay, and that's why he was told to go and learn from who? Al-Khidr. Okay, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches, okay, his messenger, and his messengers are taught by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Part of the things that he was to learn is that at the time of wahi, you're protected. When you're here with me, إِنَّهُ لَا يَخَافُ لَدَيَّ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. When you're here with me, you're safe. Nothing and no one can harm you. Okay, this is a lesson he had to learn. So for example, let's say wahi came to the Prophet ﷺ in the middle of the battlefield. Okay, and swords around, rocks around, spears, everything. Okay, the Prophet learned that there would be no harm. At that point, he doesn't need to use his intellect and be brave, defend himself, stand up, and he knows that this is the time of wahi, therefore there's no harm, nothing is going to come to him. So that was a lesson that he has to learn. There are other ways of actually explaining that, and other schools have other suggestions because they don't consider prophets to be completely infallible until the time of Risala and so on. So some may suggest that was before he was given the mission, therefore it was okay for him to be in that state. He was not a mursal yet, but it goes around against the surface of meaning of the ayat. He was already in the state of being spoken to, revealed to by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also he was told, إِنَّهُ لَا يَخَافُ لَدَيَّ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. The reason why you should not fear now is because Mursaleen should not fear, or do not fear around, should not be, there's no fear for them around me, around revelation. Yeah? So was he a Mursal at that point or not? Based on the meaning of the ayah itself. The reason why you should not fear is because Mursaleen should not fear. So he was Mursal. And therefore, if it was a sin, or if it was lack of, if it was kind of fallible, a sinful act or a fallible act, therefore if it was lack of infallibility, then it was when he was a mursal. So according to our school, it was not a fallible act, it was not a sin, it was not lack of faith, it was simply lack of knowledge. He did not know that at that point he should not worry because he's fully protected. Otherwise, that's again, we have to understand there is fear of, there's the state of bravery. The one extreme is fear. The other extreme is what? Recklessness, tahawwur. Okay? It is tahawwur to see a snake and say, I don't fear, because God protects me. I don't have fear. Is that the right attitude? What about the fire? The fire is, the house is on fire. Okay, I'm going to stay in the house. The house is on fire. I'm going to stay in here because I have no fear. Does that make sense? So again, it is only normal when one of the Imams, either Imam Sadiq or Imam Baqir alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, was leaning against a wall, but it seemed it was about to fall. So he moved away. So some ignorant person said, you run away from destiny. Okay, if it's destined, it'll fall. So you're running away from destiny. That's ignorance. Okay, so the Imam explained that I ran away from من قضاء الله إلى قدره, from the decree to the destiny, to what's destined. Okay, I run to my destiny. Obviously, if it's destined, it would happen. But قضى ربك, there is the qada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala based on actions. If this happens, this is going to happen. Okay, that the laws, the qada here, meaning his laws, his traditions, the way he set the takween of this universe. Okay, if I put my hand on burning coal, it's going to burn. Okay, that's the qada. So I move away, that's the destiny. I don't burn myself. Okay. So that's important to keep in mind, that it is perfectly fine to be to run away from danger. It's not necessarily the condemned fear. Condemned fear is where there's no real risk or harm or anything, but one is fearful, doesn't want to take any risk. There's no recklessness if you act bravely, yet they don't want to act bravely. That is where it's fear. Yeah? Right. Again, he explains that that fear is to expect that something wrong is going to happen, or something that they like is going to be lost. And especially if that is because of their attachment to those things for worldly reasons. Back to the faculty of desire. Okay, if they're fearful of losing something that they desire. Okay, that is the fear. That's normally where fear comes from. Another one of those vices with regards to, we said this is all about the faculty of, now we're in the second faculty of ghadab, okay, that state of strong emotion or anger. He says one of them is to have sighar al-nafs. Sighar al-nafs is to think little of oneself, think lowly of oneself. Okay, that is a vice. Feeling lowly, I can't do, I'm weak, I'm unable to do anything, that kind of attitude, that's a vice. The other extreme is when one thinks highly of themselves, okay, as an ujb. Yes? So what is the balance? The balance is to be thankful that God has made me capable. So I'm capable. Okay, kibar al-nafs is a good thing. So kibar al-nafs is not kibr or ujb. We have kibr and ujb as vices, and we have sighar al-nafs, thinking little of ourselves, as a vice, and we have kibar al-nafs as a virtue. So it needs a little bit of explanation, but he'll get more, deeper into it later on. However, just a little bit of explanation here. Saghar al-nafs, we said to think lowly of oneself. Okay, I'm not capable, I can't do anything. That is actually, in a way, that is lack of faith. Okay, because if we have faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we feel strong. As long as we have God on our side, Allahu waliyul ladina amanu. God is with us, so we are strong. Yeah. Kibar al-nafs here is to think that I am capable because God has made me this way. Okay? To think that God has blessed me, God has honored me. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We have honored the children of Adam. So to feel honored by God, to feel blessed, to feel capable because of the ability that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us. That's all beautiful. What if one gets to a level where they feel that they are so important, they are so big, significant, they themselves, not attributing that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That's ujb. Okay? There's ujb and there's kibr. The difference is ujb is not in comparison. Kibr is in comparison to others. So ujb is to think highly of oneself without recognizing blessings that, all our blessings to come from God. If we recognize that, that's not ujb. That is gratitude. That is understanding of God's blessings and mercy. That's not a problem. But if we do not attribute that to God, we think highly of ourselves, that's ujb. If we think we're better than others, that is kibr. Okay? So kibr is when arrogance is compared to others. Ujb is a state of thinking highly of oneself. I think they translated that ujb as self-admiration or something. However, I really find those terms, the translated terms, to be short of the meaning. So that's why I like us to learn some of these terms that come in the ahadith. So in the hadith, we have the term ujb. Ujb comes from the ajab is for something that one is amazed by. Okay? And ujb is a state where one feels like I'm amazing. Okay, I'm so good, I'm so great. not attributing that to God. If we feel, okay, I've been blessed, okay, God has blessed me, I'm skilled, I have knowledge, for example, I have, let's say somebody has good skills in writing or art or anything, you know, to recognize that and attribute that to God as a blessing from God, it's perfectly fine. But if we don't have that acknowledgement, then that's ujb, and the opposite, the virtue when it comes to that is humbleness, to feel humble. Another one is to have weakness in, to not have ambition, to be weak in their willpower, okay? Weakness in the willpower to do things, no ambitions or little ambitions, and not a very strong willpower. That is all considered, these are all considered vices as well. These are also attributed to which faculty? We said ghadab. Again, as you can see, if we only translate ghadab as anger, we cannot see all these vices and virtues. A virtue of having a strong willpower, being weak weak in the willpower, or not ambitious. All of those things you cannot derive from just anger itself. So we're speaking of this emotional state. Okay, so the first one related to the intellectual state, aql. This one is the emotional state, and then the desire. Another one is عدم الغيرة والحمية. Not having protectiveness. Ghira, they sometimes translate it as jealousy. It's incorrect. Ghira is a protective sense, okay, a sense of protectiveness over who and what you should protect, okay. Hamiya also from hama, to protect, okay. So hamiya is good except hamiyat al-jahiliyyah. So Quran condemns al-hamiyya al-jahiliyyah, meaning what? Protectiveness over things that are simply attached to me, lineage, tribe, and so on, not over the right thing, over the truth, over justice. Okay? Being protective over one's family is perfect. But what if my son harms another person? And I want to protect my son, so I start telling lies. Is that hamiyya? No, that's hamiyat al-jahiliyyah. That's not ghira or hamiyya, that's hamiyat al-jahiliyyah. That's ignorant hamiyya. Protectiveness ignorantly. Okay? So not to have that ghira, okay, somebody abuses one's family, okay, slanders one's wife, for example, or husband, and I don't, who cares? That is, not having that is lack of shaja', lack of bravery. So that is also considered a vice, which is, he says, to neglect what you should be protecting. Another vice here is ajala, to rush. He distinguishes again between ajala and ta'assuf. Ta'assuf, ajala, perhaps referring to rushing to do things. Ta'assuf is rushing in reaction within the action. Okay, so both states of hastiness, those are also vices. Again, we said that emotional state of ghadab leads us to wanting to act. Okay, so sometimes it is brave to stand up quickly when there is defense of justice or something. But what if something is vague? Okay, we don't have full understanding of the situation. but we feel, somehow we feel the urge to stand up and say something because of wanting to show off. So it's related to other faculties as well and biases, or because of asabiyya, hamiyya and asabiyya al-jahiliyya. Oh, he mentioned my father. We don't even know what he was trying to say, but immediately we get up and get into action. Okay, oftentimes wars happen or some innocent people die as a result of hastiness and rushing into action when one has to, wait and consider things, reflect, understand. So he says one of the vices obviously is ajala, and related to it is the ta'assuf. The opposite of ajala, he says, is to at-ta'anni. At-ta'anni is to basically take our time, okay, before we react, take our time to think. Okay, so a little bit of, based on the concept, the situation, we have to give some time to think before we react. The other one, he said, that is related is ta'assuf, is to be also hasty, but that is within the action. Okay, so one is doing something, and amidst that, they hear something, something happens. There is time to think, they don't think, they just react. That's also a vice. And the opposite of that, he says, is to pause, tawaqquf, to pause. You're doing something, you are faced with a situation, pause and take a moment to think before you react. He says that he will have more details about the differences between them as he comes to the remedies for them. And the opposite is to also, again, we said to pause and to have a level of tranquility. By the way, some of those things lead to things like road rage, for example. Okay? Road rage is a result of what? There's ghadab, rage, lack of understanding of the others, assumptions, often. Okay, it's almost like this person who is in the other car has a personal vendetta against us. That's how we act. He's doing it to us because he, has something against us personally. In most cases, they don't even know. That's their nature. That's how they are. Okay, and so one reacts immediately, ajala or ta'assuf, and it leads to road rage and often serious problems, accidents, or even killings that happen as a result of road rage, which is again avoidable. One has to have reach a state of tranquility, itmi'nan al-nafs, and have sukoon, calmness in their, not suggesting that never would one react. Okay, so in the battlefield, and you have a sword in your hand, and somebody's attacking you, I want to take my time and think about it. No, there are situations. Okay, this is a situation where they strike, you strike, and that's you defend and so on. But whenever one has the time, the opportunity to pause, think, reflect, then that would be the right way. One of them, he says, one of the vices in this department is to have doubts in God or the believers. Su'u dhann billahi ta'ala. Okay, to have doubt and think that God, for instance, has forsaken me, or the believers want bad things for me, evil for me. That is also one of the vices, su'ul dhan, obviously. That is a result of being coward, al-jubn, and also weakness of the nafs. To think lowly of oneself and to be coward, combined together, one would start doubting God. Okay? A believer, on the other hand, knows that God has not forsaken us, would never forsake us. I'm going through trials, alhamdulillah. This is best for me. هون ما نزل بي أنه بعين الله. Imam Hussein alayhi salam on the day of Ashura so many times said, هون ما نزل بي. It's easy what I'm going through because it is in the eyes of God. Okay? So that's faith. The opposite, the Imam could be in a state where, if not the Imam, obviously that's not possible, but an individual in that situation. I prayed for God all my life. I gave everything for the sake of God, and look at me now. In the middle of this army, thousands of people against me, and my family here, no one to protect them, and what is going on? That's true of Dhan Billah. The Imam knows, and he says it even in his dua. His dua, he knows is answered, and is a clarification of his knowledge and his faith. He says, "O Lord, if you withheld the apparent victory from us today, make it for what is better for us." This is an amazing dua of the Imam when he did it with the infant child in his bosom. When he asked for water and they slaughtered the child in his, he said, Allahumma in kunta habasta anna an-nasr fi hadha al-yawm faj'alhu lima huwa khayrun lana. Make it for what is better for us. Knowing that this is what it is. His dua is a clarification. This is what it is. It's for what is better. The apparent victory is taken, is withheld, because there's a great victory coming. That is what the Imam knows. Look at the state of Karbala today. Where is the enemy? Where are Yazid and Muawiyah la'natullah alayhima, and Al Abi Sufyan, and Al Ziyad, and Al Marwan, and Ibn Sa'ad, and Shamr? Where are they? وَأُتْبِعُوا فِي هَذِهِ الدُّنْيَا فِي هَذِهِ لَعْنَةً. In this world they are followed with a curse. La'na. Confirmation of denial or being removed from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what follows them in this world. And Yawm al-Qiyamah, the real result or the consequences. And where is Imam Hussein? Look at the state of the Imam. Not just the Imam, children of the Imam, anywhere. An infant child in Halab has a shrine. And they tried for centuries. For centuries, they tried to remove any sign. At some point, I lived that state. When I first visited Halab, to protect the stone that had a drop of the blood of the Imam. A drop of the blood of the Imam was on a stone in Halab. It was in a church that the priest, I think I shared this story, the priest asked for the head to be given to him, and he washed and perfumed and spoke to the head, Salamullah alayh. That stone that he put the head on remained. And every year people who go and visit, if they go on the day of Ashura, they say, we see the blood, how it becomes as if it's fresh. It's red as if it was just there. That stone, to be protected, had to be removed from there at one point because of all the looters and the enemies of Ahlul Bayt. That region does not have many of the followers or lovers around. And so they had to take it to another location, which was on the top of the mountain. There's the shrine of the miscarried son of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, also named Muhsin, in Halab. I visited the shrine when the stone was there. It was held there until it's safe so that they can return it back to that church, which eventually was returned back, and I visited both shrines afterwards. I was there personally. This is just an example. Karbala was flattened. Some of you know at the time of Mutawakkil, it was flattened. He tried to run the water over the graves of the martyrs, and that was rebuilt. It was attacked again and again, time and time. In the 1800s, the Wahhabis attacked and looted and so on. It gets rebuilt, and every year, more and more people are, as the dua of Nabiullah Ibrahim alayhi salam in the Quran, وَاجْعَلْ أَفْئِدَةً مِّنَ النَّاسِ تَهْوِي إِلَيْهِ. Hearts of the people are drawn to them. The hearts are drawn literally. Muslim and non-Muslim, they walk with their hearts to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. This is when we have faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, despite the circumstances. Otherwise, one who does not purify in difficult situations may start doubting. Su'ul dhan billah ta'ala, in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, doubting God and His support and His decree and His help. And also this comes from the weakness of the nafs, and also from being coward, in a state of cowardness. Also, he says it could be the quality, the wrong assessments and quality of thinking, the bad quality of thinking or reflection without the right guidelines. And the opposite, obviously, is husnul dhan, to have, to give people the benefit of the doubt and to have faith in God, which is, again, husnul dhan leads to faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, billahi ta'ala. And that is that the husnul dhan billah and husnul dhan with the people is the result of bravery, a state of shaja'ah and big nafs, which are the balance, the middle path, neither extreme, neither recklessness nor being coward and feeling low. Any questions? Yeah.
What is khashya? Someone can understand the goal.
Yeah. Khashya is similar to fear. The term, sometimes it's used interchangeably with khawf and khashya. Khashya is to fear something from happening. Okay, akhsha is when I'm fearing in specific things to happen. Khawf is the state of the heart. Khashya is a fear of something happening or not happening. Okay, to fear that I'm gonna miss out on something. But it is used somehow interchangeably. I mean, khashyatillah, for example, in the Quran we have the term khashyatillah, and we have Allahumma اجعلني أخشاك كأني أراك. Make me have the khashya from you like I see you. So here the khashya is to have the fear of the consequences that would happen from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing that God can do things and His decree will happen. There's nothing that would protect us against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if He decrees something, if He wants something to happen. So that khashya from God is to have that consideration that things could happen in the way that God wants them and against what we have in mind and what we'd like to happen. So let's do the right thing so that the good things will happen to us. So again, it's very similar to khawf. Do we have time? We should, yeah. So inshallah, we'll continue. Just mental note that next week we'll have a break and then we'll resume the following week, inshallah. Next week we have the Arba'in Majalis, inshallah, the Majalis of Arba'in, and we'll resume the following week. In the following session, mental note, inshallah, will continue on the vices based on the faculty of ghadab, and will continue to the shahwa and to the ones that are related to two or more of the faculties. Any questions or comments before we conclude? We're still in the boring parts, huh? We haven't gotten into the... Yeah, we haven't gotten into the exciting parts of how do we fix those things. But being aware is the first step, no? You know, just like in anything that one wants to quit, when they call helpline and say, I have this problem, you know, someone who's, say, God forbid, suicidal, or somebody who wants to quit certain habits, when they call, the first thing that they're told that you have already taken the first step. You know, you've acknowledged the biggest step, in fact, acknowledgement of the problem, knowing what the problem may be. So as we are studying those, perhaps we can look at where we might be or where some of our issues might be, some of our vices, and inshallah, none of us think we're perfect, so that we're then capable of working on them and eventually remedying them, inshallah. If there are no questions or comments, inshallah, we'll conclude. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى